I'm Anna Gordon. I'm the EVP and Managing Director of BBC Worldwide's business in Latin America and US Hispanic. I run the BBC's TV channels, its third-party programme sales business and its licensing business across the region. I moved to Miami to take on this role back in September. Before then, I've worked at the BBC for coming up to 10 years in a variety of interesting roles. I headed up strategy for the BBC's UK television channels, working with some brilliant creative minds across BBC TV. I also worked as part of the brilliant BBC iPlayer team. I directed strategy for our global content sales business and developed BBC's global OTT plans, and most recently took on this opportunity here in Miami. It's not been a linear career route. I've not climbed the ladder per se. In fact, I've moved up, down, sideways, in order to find opportunities that were interesting for me and fulfilling for me personally and professionally. I've also not been ruthlessly career driven. I have a 2-year-old son, and I took the opportunity when he was born to take 12 months off of maternity leave. And even before that, my husband and I, about 5 years ago, took 6 months off work to travel through Latin America, which was a fantastic personal experience and challenge. And also probably where my passion for the region really became embedded. I'm really thankful to work for a company that's offered me the opportunity to do this both professionally and personally. And I'm privileged generally to work in an industry and for a company where women generally are well represented, and where I personally have never felt that there's a glass ceiling in terms of what I can achieve. In BBC Worldwide, our executive board is made up of 12 members, 5 of whom are female. And the BBC as a whole is full of strong, successful, inspiring women in prominent positions. It's not the norm though, and although we've made progress across the UK and the US, there are some stats out there which are quite sobering. Of the Fortune 500 CEOs, only 5% of them are female, so there's still a lot to do. I've always been aware as a woman that you probably have to fight a little bit harder, and I think it makes you a stronger leader as a result. I started early. I was 11 when I challenged my mum about the fact that my brother was down for private school where I was not. I did get to the school that I wanted to go to, but I also learned in the process that it pays sometimes to fight for your right to sit at the table as a woman. I also learned to give my mum a break a little bit of the time too. But I've never felt that as a woman opportunities were closed to me. I attended a great university. I was elected vice president of my college. I've been successful in my career. But I think that I probably did have to fight a little bit harder for those opportunities than maybe I would otherwise, and that's made me become more tenacious, more resilient, and probably a little bit tougher too. My first job out of university was as a strategy consultant, which was a fantastic opportunity to work with international blue chip companies across a variety of industries. But I started that role at 22. I was blonde, I was female, I was baby-faced, and the first project I was given was to go to Detroit and meet the big 3 automotive manufacturers, which was probably the most male-dominated environment you could find in the early 2000s. And they assumed that I was there to take notes. So it was a sobering insight. And at the start of my career back as a strategy consultant, I remember a male colleague saying to me that for a woman to be successful in her career, that she needed to pretend to be a man. I remember not being quite sure what he meant then. It certainly didn't go down very well with me or my female colleagues, but I think what he meant was that a woman was expected to assume some of the more traditionally male characteristics, assertiveness, being domineering, being driven. And I certainly think some of that is true. I think assertiveness is really important in your career, whether you're male or female. But what I can say now, 10 years later, 10 years more than 10 years later, is that actually what's worked for me is not necessarily that. I think what's worked for me is being open, being understanding, being collaborative, and being more tuned into people's emotions and what's going on around me. And I think those qualities are incredibly important in the world of business that we work in today. There's been a lot of disruption. You know, the internet in particular has changed the way that we work. It's forced us all to think very differently. That's certainly the case in media. It's fundamentally changed the way that we consume content. It's changed on what devices we consume it. It's changed what form we consume it in, how we buy it, where we get it from, who makes it. And it's challenging a lot of the traditional commercial models in media, and nobody really knows quite how it's all going to play out. In an ever-changing and quite uncertain environment, I think that some of those more traditional female characteristics become a real advantage. Adaptability, flexibility, collaboration and partnership, being attuned to what surrounds us and what's going on. I mean, I call them female characteristics, but actually they're ones that I've seen in abundance in the best bosses and leaders, whether they're male or female. I think the other observation I'd have is that people are increasingly wanting to balance home and work. Responsibility for that balance used to sit primarily with the woman rather than the man, but nowadays I see as many men as women wanting to be more involved parents. And I certainly see many women not willing to completely compromise on their career in order to become mothers. Right now I'm working and I'm the primary breadwinner for our family. My husband is a stay-at-home father. Our roles may reverse again in a few years' time. But it's still important to me, even as the main breadwinner, to spend time with my husband and young son. And I think that reflects how a lot of people are thinking about things. And I apply that thinking to how I work as a leader and as a manager. I don't clock watch. I don't mind what hours people work. For me, it's about one question, which is, are you doing a good job? And I think people do a good job when they're feeling empowered and they're feeling fulfilled, not just from a professional perspective, but from a personal perspective too. And I think that's resonating with a lot of people nowadays who want a better home-life balance, but who also want a really fulfilling and a challenging career. I'm not sure if this approach is particularly female. It's my approach. It's what's enabled me to succeed and feel fulfilled in what I do. And I do hope that, you know, the next generation will not be having this debate about what male or female leadership looks like, but rather what great leadership is, regardless of gender.